Welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to be talking about some of the big themes that are coming up in March's astrology. March is one of the months in 2025 that I would argue is probably the most interesting and exciting months of 2025 because we've got two retrogrades happening. Specifically, Venus is retrograding, Mercury is retrograding, and also we have an eclipse happening. So in this episode today, what we're going to be focusing on is primarily Venus retrograde because this isn't a retrograde that we experience as frequently as like a Mercury retrograde and also as an eclipse. Those happen every year, and Venus retrograde is really only every 18 months. So we will touch on Mercury retrograde too and the eclipse to the extent that it's like impacting this Venus retrograde because it really is intensifying the energy that we are experiencing in March astrology. So it's a big month, you guys. And also, I just have to call out that like officially we are no longer in Mars retrograde. Like, thank goodness. I was so tired of that like lousy energy, this like lazy energy that I feel like, I don't know, as soon as it turned direct, which was as we're recording this, like last night, late night, I just felt like I just had so much energy. And I don't know if it was just like all in my head, like, yay, Mars is no longer retrograde. But really, we didn't need to have Mars, Venus, and Mercury all retrograde at the same time. So it's a little gift for us to have, you know, some time before Venus retrograde happens.
Yeah, 5 days we get before all other planets start moving in a different direction. I thought that was kind of funny. Mars retrograde really was a slog this year. Like Keelie said, with Venus retrograde, it doesn't happen all the time. So this only happens every 22 months. And then to have those 5 days of buffer time before we enter into a new retrograde cycle, super nice, especially for personal planets. The planets that are going to impact us the most on our day-to-day basis and that we're likely going to feel a lot more than, let's just say, you know, Jupiter or Pluto being retrograde because they're so far out, they're so slow, and they kind of weeble wobble back and forth all the time. So I too am excited for this. But I remember when we were prepping for our 2025 astrology episode and we like got to March and we're like, oh wow, okay, yep.
Yeah.
That's a big month. And I'm just kind of like, you know what? February felt particularly moody, I would say. Like that's the best way I could put it for me personally. And so I'm like, oh gosh, March is coming, and I know March is full of a lot of energy. And so knowing this information can help us prepare ourselves and just be aware of what's coming. It's like being prepared for weather that we don't know what kind of weather it will be.
Yeah. 2025 from like January 1st, well, actually December 6th of 2024 through February 23rd. With this Mars retrograde, we were really in like a different energy kicking off this year. And now, you know, entering into March, like we're really going to feel a shift in energy happening. So a lot of what we're talking about today really is to just kind of support you guys and kind of understanding some of the energetics that you're going to be navigating throughout March. It's going to feel a lot different. There's going to be a lot of energy happening. And so we are just diving into that today. So we kind of wanted to kick things off with this episode of just kind of talking a little bit about, you know, what is a retrograde? And one of the ways that I really like to talk about a retrograde is I think about them as these really powerful portals of reflection and reconstruction. So the major themes of a retrograde specifically, those are really going to depend on the planet that is retrograding. So there's a reason why when Mercury goes retrograde, there's like communication issues and technology issues and travel issues, right? Because those are all themes of Mercury. Well, Venus is the planet, as we've talked about before in our planets episode, of love, of relationships, of connection, of beauty, values, money, and worth. So during a Venus retrograde, what you can expect is these themes specifically in your life are all undergoing this powerful period and portal of reflection and reconstruction. So a lot of times during a retrograde in general, there can be these like feelings of confusion, especially around the themes of that specific planet. And that's because these portals of reflection really are calling us to dig deep and take a deeper look at the themes of whatever the planet that's retrograding is in, so that we can really reconstruct these themes in our life. So with Venus, you know, again, being this planet of relationships, being this planet of love and our values, this is going to be a time where, you know, at the highest of levels, you're going to be really asked to take a deeper look at your relationships, okay? Your perhaps love life and your values and what's really being asked to be reconstructed here at this time. Really, you know, having the question of what's working and what's not in your love life, in your relationship, as it relates to just your own values, your own relationship with money even, and self-worth.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful to take a look at these themes as often as we can, because these are things in areas that we don't need to suffer, but Venus retrograde certainly makes it a lot more obvious, tangible, ready for us to evaluate this. And so if something's been feeling off for a while, this is definitely the time to reevaluate, reconstruct, and actually ask yourself those hard questions. And I find it even more impactful happening around this beautiful time of the spring equinox. Like traditionally, this is the astrological new year. I mean, we could come up with hundreds of new years, right? Like there's so many, but the astrological new year is a very significant point in time where we've got this new emergence of spring. And so with these themes happening in the Pisces and Aries, signs, it adds even more power to it, in my personal opinion, because this is like the closing of one year and the opening of a new. And that way we can really think about this time as like, yeah, retrograde, all about redoing, reconstructing, revisiting, but also it can be a great time to close and open some new chapters, especially with that eclipse energy that's going to bolster this retrograde.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. With that eclipse here, we've talked about eclipses in our last episode. We're going to do a special eclipse episode after this one that you guys will have to listen to. But eclipses are these like karmic endings and beginnings. And so if you think about it, everything we've just talked about with like a Venus retrograde, you're reconstructing your relationship life, your love life. What are your values? And with these karmic endings and completions and new beginnings and this like spring equinox, all of this energy happening at the exact same time as this Venus retrograde, a lot of stuff is going to come up. It's pretty much inevitable. Stuff's going to come up, and it's almost like us just being able to have this level of deeper awareness. So it's not like we're, running around like not sure what's going on, feeling really chaotic, feeling really confused, but we can just really like deepen into just this chapter of life that, yeah, it might feel a bit confusing and it might feel a bit uncomfortable because what's our relationship with change? Sometimes it can feel a bit uncomfortable, but like at the end of the day, we can also understand that like with eclipses come like soul level growth and transformation. And so whatever change is being brought our way, we can know that it's meant for us on this like soul level.
Yeah, and don't take this as us telling you, like, you're going to break up, you're going to get, like, things are going to happen, because it's not necessarily that. Like, we have no idea how to predict the future. If we did, obviously we'd be playing the lottery, probably not recording podcasts, but we're just helping you understand what are the themes here that may come up for you. And specifically, we're going to talk about like, depending on where things are in your chart, how you can be even more prepared if this is like really impacting your chart. But it's really interesting because people always ask me, oh my God, is this going to happen during this time retrograde? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I have no idea. How are you feeling? Because you're a better, judge or like crystal ball reader of your own life than I could ever be realistically. But it's all about working with the themes and not being afraid. I feel like if retrogrades are starting to make you afraid, this is the time to like pause this episode and go back to another one and just listen to one of our other episodes and have some fun, because this is not meant to be a fearful time, but it's kind of like, hey, what could be coming up for you this month? And I was telling Keelie before this episode, like, I love looking back at retrogrades, right? Like I love looking back at retrograde periods and be like, oh, so that was the theme I experienced at that point. So even if you come back to this episode in April or May and you're like, oh, that's kind of what happened, so I can integrate the lessons learned, that's also perfect too.
Absolutely. And Nicole's been talking about the themes of the specific Venus retrograde. Every Venus retrograde is going to have a little bit of like a different flavor depending on what signs it's moving through, what planets it's also being influenced by and making connections to up in the sky. And with this Venus retrograde specifically, as Nicole mentioned, it's retrograding through the signs of Aries and Pisces. And so what we're going to be learning about are Aries and Pisces specific themes as part of this Venus retrograde and in relation to, relationships and values. And to Nicole's point too, you guys, relationships are our biggest opportunities for, learning new lessons and growth, right? Like relationships really are these like triggers for growth in our life. And so this Venus retrograde, like we can really use the relationships in our life to grow, to evolve. And whether that's like evolving to the next relationship beyond the one that you're in, or evolving in the relationship that you're in right now, like it's just a beautiful opportunity to grow wherever you're at right now and really like transition into this like next stage of evolution of you as a soul, since this is tied to an eclipse. And that's what we're going to be doing, is evolving as souls. So one of the things for you guys to also consider is to really look at what planets you have currently in Aries and Pisces. Because again, Aries and Pisces being the themes of this Venus retrograde, we're going to get into specifically what these themes are here in a bit, but that really is like the storyline that we're going to be living over the course of like these next 40 days while Venus is retrograding through Aries and Pisces. But one of the things for you to really deepen into and look at is in your own chart, do you have any personal planets or any planets at all really in the sign of Aries and Pisces? Because if so, these aspects of you are going to be impacted by this retrograde, and you might feel this on a more personal level. Specifically, if you have any planets between 0 and 10 degrees Aries or 24 and 29 degrees Pisces, then like Venus is going to be retrograding directly over those specific parts of you, those aspects of you, as we like to call planets. So taking note of any planets you have specifically in those degrees, and even like noting when Venus is going to be retrograding over that planet specifically can really give you some awareness. So like in the moment, in real time, you can say, oh, like this is what that feels like. For me specifically, Venus is going to be retrograding directly over my moon in Pisces. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm going to really know, when is this going to be happening? Of course, I'm going to be feeling it over the course of the whole 40 days probably. And I'm going to be really learning some strong lessons as, you know, Aries and Pisces lessons as it relates to my specific moon, that aspect of me. Also, my Venus is pretty close to those degrees as well. So really thinking about, okay, as it's going over these parts of me and just throughout these 40 days, like really having awareness of what's showing up for me. How am I being asked to evolve and to grow? And it's happening in my 7th house of relationships. So that area of life specifically, I can look at. Of course, Venus, you know, retrograde, the planet of relationships in my 7th house of relationships, like relationships, I know is going to be a huge theme for me specifically in this Venus retrograde. But for you, look at, you know, okay, planets in Aries and Pisces, but also what house is Aries and Pisces in your chart? Because this is going to be an area of life where you are going to be asked to take a deeper look at these themes.
Yeah, for sure. And for those of you who maybe are a bit more astrologically advanced or in tune with your chart, you can look at the signs, all of the cardinal and all of the mutable signs. So you can look at Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, and then you can look at Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. So Pisces and Aries obviously are the two that will experience it the most, like Keelie said, but you know, those others will be in square opposition or, you know, conjunct, like we said, for Aries and Pisces energy. And so like thinking about this, like I thought back to when was the last time Venus retrograded in these signs? And it happened to be March and April of 2017. So my favorite thing to do is like go back in my camera roll, which I took far less photos in 2017 than I do now, which is kind of funny. I guess I wasn't like online as a business owner at that point, so I didn't have like a ton of reference, but I did notice some interesting themes that were coming up around that time. So it can be, you know, obviously a lot of the other planets have moved significantly since 2017, so it won't be a one for one, but it can kind of give you an idea, especially for Venus, you know, specifically in those signs, what may have been coming up. And it's a really great activity to do, to be like, like, how was I feeling at that time? And, you know, it made me think of a few other things too, like that I don't really play a lot with Venus as a person. Like, I'm just like, I don't know. And Keelie and I were speculating because, like, maybe it's in Capricorn for me. Like, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Capricorn serious.
Yeah, exactly. Capricorn serious. But I also have so many other planets touching my personal Venus in my chart that I'm like, I find it hard to, like, pick, like, which one is Venus? Like, which one is speaking to me? But, you know, I will say, it's just, like, a fun little fact, is that I was looking for nursery decorations the other day, and this thing came up on Etsy, and it was, like, a Venus portal. And it was really beautiful, like this gold frame. And it just looked really, it was like people swimming in this beautiful moon. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. It was pink and it was so cute. And I was like, oh my God, I think I'm going to buy this for the nursery. And I was like, who am I? Like, what am I attracted to this little thing? And I feel like, I don't know, Venus might just be like having some more fun with me. I showed it to my husband. He was like, what is that? And I was like, it's a portal to Venus. And he was like, oh, okay. Like, not interested. He's like, that's weird. And I was like, yeah, you never know. So, you know, just kind of like letting yourself play with this stuff too. Like, whatever's coming up for you may just be a little informative. But, you know, I want to talk about Venus went retrograde March 1st at 10 degrees of Aries. And then, as Keelie said, it will retrograde into Pisces on March 27th and then end on April 12th at 24 degrees Pisces. So looking at those dates and just kind of being aware of it, you know, we have Venus retrograding in Aries. So that's where it's first going to say, oh, I'm going to retrograde now. And that's going to be, it's going to be its own set of themes that we have to work with here. So when we think about this, like since Venus entered Aries on February 4th, which happened almost a whole month prior to it retrograding, you know, the shifts that we're feeling toward assertiveness, standing up for our needs, especially in love and relationships, will make so much sense. I'm thinking of a very specific friend right now who's having this whole transformation through her own dating life, and she's really showing up and speaking up for herself. She's also an Aries sun, so I feel like this makes a lot of sense for her, but it's really cool to see. And so, you know, what needs have you been expressing lately in your relationships? Take note of this. I can even see this in myself, where certain aspects of things where I'm just like a little bit more clear with what I've been needing in my own relationship. But, you know, there can be a potential for some defensiveness and maybe some entitlement that can come online with this. A little bit one-sided, if you will, where it's like, I need this. I want this. If you think of Aries, the warrior of the zodiac, the I go first type sign, that very assertive, childlike feeling, it can be a little bit wounded if it's not getting what it wants or what it needs. And so listen out for that sometimes, because we can become a little bit deaf to it. But there will be a clear vibe shift from going from like, wow, woe is me, right? And like that kind of like sorry for myself, sense of longing, maybe escapism or like disassociation, very Pisces vibes, to assertiveness and actually speaking up for yourself and what you need. Be cautious though. I told Keelie before this, I was like, I'm just trying not to pick a fight with my husband for the next like 55 days. Because I know, like with my Aries moon, I can easily like, oopsies, like I didn't mean to like be so annoying, but I was, you know? So I'm just kind of being like, okay, how can I speak up for myself? How can I get my needs met without like being that like bulldozer, if you will? But you know, focus on your personal rights and needs and setting appropriate boundaries. This is going to be really important at this time. And boundaries don't have to be so mean. They don't have to be terrible. If you've never set any, you might feel really weird, but you know, just start small. It doesn't mean that you have to like cut everyone off in your life. These are just suggestions of themes you might feel called to explore at this time.
Yeah. I mean, if we think about it from like a timeline perspective, you know, as you're listening to this, Venus has just gone retrograde, but the entire month before that, so again, like as Nicole said, starting on February 4th, that's when Venus entered Aries. Well, before that, starting on January 2nd, that's when Venus was in Pisces. So when you think about this transition of like Pisces to Aries, what we've really been navigating since the start of this year is these themes of Pisces and Aries and the way that we're like showing up in relationships. So we can just kind of pause here and like reflect, how have these past couple of months been for you? While Venus has been moving through Pisces, while Venus has been moving through Aries, what's been coming up for you in love and relationship, you know, relationship with others, relationship with yourself, relationship with money, your values, your self-worth? What has been coming up for you? Pisces, this like self-sacrificing sign, this like gentler, more feminine energy, more flowy energy, very intuitive, but also, you know, very compassionate and sometimes may just like not want to rock the boat and like not want to cause any conflict and maybe wants to sit back a bit. But then as soon as Venus enters Aries, it's like, oh no, like I'm going to assert myself in this relationship. Like I am going to express my needs. So how has that looked for you? Because even for me, thinking back, okay, as Venus has been moving through Aries in February, have I been a little bit more combative in my relationships? Have I been expressing myself and asserting myself maybe a little too strong, right? Because now as Venus is going retrograde through Aries and then into Pisces, it's like almost this like these reverse lessons. It's like we're taking a minute now to like press pause and reassess like, how have we been showing up in those ways, and where does there maybe need to be some involvement? Have we been asserting ourselves, or have we not been asserting ourselves? Have we been setting boundaries, or have we not been setting boundaries? What does a healthy boundary look like, and what does a not healthy boundary look like, right? All of these questions are what we're going to be asking through this Venus retrograde period.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking back like days after Venus entered Aries, I definitely was like, I got a little taste of my own medicine. I was like,
well, your moon's in Aries too, right?
Exactly.
Is it getting triggered? Is it at the degree?
No,
it's later.
Thankfully, it's not. I'm like, okay, I've got some buffer between my moon and this Aries of Venus retrograde, but I was like, oh, like I was having a discussion with my husband. It was on Super Bowl Sunday. That's why I know it was so soon after Venus entered Aries. And he was just like, you know, like you've been saying some things. And like, I'm like, oh, I didn't notice. And then I was like, oh yeah, I am a little bit bitchy. Let's just I can chalk a lot of things up to being pregnant, but also like Venus being in Aries, I'm like, oh yeah, that could also be astrological. So it's been fascinating to look back at that, like preparing for this retrograde and knowing like, oh gosh, these themes are going to kind of pop up again, and know like, okay, like what can I look out for knowing that this is coming? Because I don't track the transits of every planet that closely, meaning like on February 4th, I wasn't like, oh, Venus is now in Aries, so like I might feel a little fiery. No, I was just kind of like, oopsies, like a week later when I was like being told that. So it was helpful of a mirror, you know, and if you have someone who can reflect that to you, that's probably what's going to happen during this retrograde, is that you might have some of your own stuff reflected back to you in interactions with others, especially one-to-one and personal relationships and friendships. So, you know, thinking about all of these things, like Venus retrograde in Aries started on March 1st. Where are you now? Like, when are you listening to this? How far into it are you? Are you right at the beginning? Can you prepare a bit? There's an interesting thing about how, like, how are we actually showing up in love and asserting yourself in relationships here? Because, like, I feel like how we show up in love is like a reflection of how we've been loved, how we've loved ourselves, and like so much from our younger years. And that's a lot to unpack, and you don't have to fix everything and understand it, but it can really give you a lens of like, oh, I'm replaying the same scenario, or I'm replaying the same story again here. Like, how can I have a new experience? And thinking about this, it's like we're reconstructing and reevaluating. And I think that is akin to creation. That's really creating something new in the future state of like where you're going, aka where we're all headed to, because we're all moving forward in the future, that will really help you and benefit you in some way. These retrogrades are meant to help, not necessarily make us feel crazy. But another thing here, like also connected to creation, is like, what is feeling inhibited right now? Like, are there any fiery passions that want to be like let out and like shared with the world, or even just shared with yourself? You know, what have you been holding back or not showing up as your truest self? I know I've run into this issue a lot having an online business, where sometimes I'm just like, you know, not fully doing the thing the way that I typically would, or I feel like I have to show up in a certain way. It's all a great question, especially at this time, to say, how would I show up if I was just being completely me, completely normal? My hair would probably be not that nice, right? I was just showing up and however I wanted, and that can really play into it. But also like rediscovering the importance of paying attention to your personal needs and expressing those needs. So like sometimes we can over assert ourselves in relationships, and then other times we're like, no, don't worry about me. Like, you just don't say anything. You kind of like put it in your back pocket and you're like, oh, don't worry. How much stuff are you carrying around that needs to be said? How many times have you bit your tongue and maybe felt like, I better not say anything? So it's like knowing when it's appropriate to actually have those conversations and share, or when do you actually need to kind of take care of what you need without expecting that from someone else, or expecting someone else to meet those needs for you. All very potent questions to ask at this time.
When I think about Venus and Aries, I'm just like keep hearing like you're bold in love, right? You're bold in love, but like it's anything. It's, you know, love, we give love. Love is energy, and we give love to so many different things. It can be to people, or it can be, you know, to our creative endeavors. It's passion. It's just like, how are we showing up boldly in pursuit of, you know, our dreams and our creations and in our relationships? Like, where have we been holding back that we can lean in a little bit deeper to? Like, that is kind of this permission while like Venus is retrograding in Aries. Like, where have we been holding back? Yes, asserting yourself in a relationship, but also asserting yourself in like all areas of life. Like, where are you not all in? Because Aries goes all in. It goes all in, and it goes all in really fast and really hard, and it holds nothing back. And like, that's what we're being asked right now. Where can we lean in more with love and really let love into our lives? Because yeah, that Aries energy is so big, so bold, so ready to love and be loved in return.
It's kind of like, I think of like Venus and Aries, it's like cuteness aggression. Like when you see like something really cute and you're just like, oh my gosh, like I just like, you're so adorable. Or like how you'd be toward like a dog or a puppy or a cat. Like it's kind of just being bold in love. I love that. It's like the way you would be so excited to see like a small animal, you know, even like a goat. I see goats online all the time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, stop it. Like they're so adorable. Like that, like unfettered love to this like animal. I feel like that's kind of how we should be in everything. Like we are love, you know, there's no difference there. It's a great point and distinction to make of like, oh yeah, it doesn't just have to be in your relationships. Like this will show up everywhere. And, you know, I'm personally like looking into a lot of this retrograde about like not self-worth in a way like I don't feel like I'm worthy, but just like really like upping the ante there of like, okay, like how do I really feel about like what I'm providing, what I'm producing, what I'm doing, how I'm showing up in the world. And I feel like that's a huge theme too. And that's singular. Like that's looking backwards at me versus just in my relationships, because sometimes that first relationship with love, of course, will probably existed with your parents, but you know, you really need to learn how to love yourself too. What's RuPaul says, like, if you don't love yourself, how in the hell are you going to love anybody else, you know? And that's like so true. So true.
I'm also thinking too that I feel like this window of time right now, this retrograde period, it's like really getting clear on like what does that next step look like, because Aries is all about like taking the next step, like taking action, like moving forward. And while yes, a retrograde, you're kind of like in reverse and rewind, like doing some reflecting, it's also like what is the aligned next step that I need to take? Like maybe you are in a relationship, or maybe it's maybe you're in a friendship and things have felt a bit rocky, or your own partnership, things have felt a bit rocky, or you've been a bit clear on like your own values and how, you know, those values are being reflected in the work that you're doing in the world, or your own relationship with money and self-worth, like whatever it is that's this like, you know, Venus theme. Where have you been kind of like in this confusing energy of, you know, what does that next step look like? Because this is an opportunity to really get clear. You know, the retrogrades, again, it can bring up confusion, but ultimately, like at the end of the day, it is so that you can become more clear in an aligned way so that you can take that next action step. So in a really like surrendered way during this time, it's thinking about, what do I really want? You know, asking yourself the deeper questions, going really deep within, doing the self-reflection so that you can, at the end of the day, come out of this period of time really clear about what that next step looks like for you so that you can go all in on that thing, whatever that is.
Yeah, I love that. And just for people who may be listening, like, oh my God, it's more work. I have to do more self-reflection, right? You've already done so much. I like to think of self-reflection like it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be long journal entries. I mean, it can. It could totally be a deep meditation. It could be a breathwork practice. It could be a long session with a coach or a therapist. Who knows? But, you know, it could also be just like you thinking in the car. You know, you revisiting a few ways that you felt and just like kind of, you know, just reorienting yourself in your own mind, like what actually happened here, how true is that for me, because I often think like coming out of a time where I've done a ton of healing for years, it's like, oh my God, more work, you know. And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be work, quote unquote, but I always say the work is in the living, like the way we live, the way we exist day to day is actually more of the work than the deeper, you know, healing work that many of us have embarked on over time. But, you know, speaking of healing, we've talked about Aries. Now, Venus is also going to retrograde through Pisces. So let's talk about Pisces a bit, because March 27th through April 12th, Venus is going to dip back into Pisces and have those themes be replaying. So Venus was in Pisces January 2nd through February 4th. So we experienced this whole month of it early on this year, as we do every year. It's a very regular transit. So there are some potentials with Pisces. You know, it is a selfless, beautiful sign. It really can be in the depths, really amazing, but it can have us looking through some rose-colored glasses, especially in relationships. So where do we find that, like, I can fix this energy, you know, coming up, or like everything will be fine energy, when maybe like your gut just is like saying, no, it won't actually be fine. You have to speak up, or you have to say something different, or you have to show up differently. Our moods can fluctuate and we can be extra sensitive. Personally, me as an Aries moon, a pregnant woman with an Aries moon, I'm not looking forward to that part, because I'm like, I'm already sensitive right now. I don't want to be more sensitive, but Pisces can really help us unearth those emotions in a way that like really help us move forward and feel on a deeper level. So try not to avoid them if they come up. Don't just like sweep it away, like really be in your feels. There can be a tendency toward forgiveness and self-sacrifice, but I think that's a really nice thing. So sometimes we can be a little bit more selfless at this time, as long as we're not overdoing it or becoming codependent and having difficulty asserting what we actually need. There is an emphasis here on giving rather than receiving. I think that is always a beautiful theme to think about, is like, how much am I giving at this point? But, you know, sometimes these themes can show where we've maybe been overgiving, right? And maybe where we need to receive a bit more. Or have I been a little selfish? Have I been not really doing that much? And maybe that theme will come online of like, oh, you know what? Maybe I could actually give a little bit more here than I've just been very quiet or focusing on myself. You know, Venus will make connections at this point with Neptune and the North Node. So we have this is a very Piscean time that we're in, but we're exiting very quickly in 2025. And so these themes, I think they're really finishing up. They're really asking for a closure here. Now, this Pisces theme that we're experiencing, we're seeing a lot. The North Node is telling us where we're going, but it's saying, hey, we're headed towards surrender, compassion, spiritual connection. But Neptune, when it finally moves out of Pisces into Aries, at least for a good amount of time this year, it's almost going to be like when you come out of a dark movie theater and you see the light of day and you're like, oh my gosh, what is going on? It's going to be a little bit like, whoa, I see things so differently now than they were before. Or like maybe it's just like bright and you kind of have to adjust. And so these themes that we experience most of January will be a recurrence of these themes, especially after March 27th when Venus retrogrades into Pisces. But we're also going to have this like extra like 1-2 punch of Pisces energy that won't completely leave us at that point because of Neptune and the North Node.
One of the things that's coming up for me around this like North Node theme is, as we know, it's eclipse season is all around the nodes, and we've got the North Node in Pisces, so very aligned with like all this Venus retrograde through Pisces, and we have the South Node in Virgo. Well, this lunar eclipse in Virgo that's happening mid-March, right? That Virgo energy, we're leaving behind something with it. A lunar eclipse is all about endings and completions. And the solar eclipse, which we're experiencing at the beginning of, or at the end of March, beginning of April, that's going to be all about like new beginnings. So what we're letting go of, like mid-March, right smack dab, in the middle of this Venus retrograde, is so much about surrendering the themes of Virgo, which guess what that is? Anywhere that we are holding on too tightly to something, where our grip is so tight and we are just in control and just like trying to perfect things and like trying to have this really tight grip around things, like we are going to be asked to let go of whatever that is. So anywhere that you are holding on too tightly to something in a relationship, maybe you have controlling tendencies in the way that like you're showing up in partnership or something like that, like those tendencies are going to be let go during this time. And like that is going to be so much of like these like karmic releases that we're going to be experiencing, and will push us into this state of surrender. Like we will be, that's what eclipses do. They kind of force us into a different energy and into a different direction for our own soul's evolution. So it's like we are moving into surrender, and we must let go of control during this time, however that's showing up in whatever area of life that this retrograde is moving through, or specifically in your relationships.
Yeah, for sure. And thinking about that, like as someone who doesn't even like the word surrender, I like to think of it as like, if you don't, it will happen for you. Like you will have to have the faith, and you will have to let go in a way that you couldn't even predict. And it doesn't have to be scary. It just kind of is like almost like, oh, wow, I wouldn't have done that on my own, but the eclipse is going to be like, hey, look what I did for you. And look at how amazing it turned out. So, it's a really cool time to experience that and to really see consciously, can I be okay with that surrender? Because that Virgo South Node is no joke. It is no joke. I have no Virgo placements, but I feel like I understand Virgo pretty well because they make me so nervous.
Virgos make you sweat.
Virgos make me sweat. So I'm like, oh man, like all my Virgos are going to be on extra point. Like right now, they're going to be on like dotting every I, crossing every T at this point. And it's going to be like, look, it's okay. We're going to be all right. But I know we're all going to experience this in our own ways. And so thinking about this, like, okay, so what can we expect for some specific themes during the retrograde period? That March 27th through April 12th for Pisces. It's like, we're going to have to revisit those areas of self-sacrifice and codependency. Like, if you don't notice it happening on your own, like, things will pop up for you to revisit and to see and to mirror this to you. So it's like, okay, how can I show compassion versus meet the needs of others versus, how am I asserting my own needs in relationships? I'll tell you, this shows up for me a lot because years ago, I had an astrologer tell me, Nicole, your role in this life is to guide and not fix. And for many years prior, and this is why I ended up in this huge healing spiral, I was everyone's go-to person for everything. I was their fixer. I was their person. But you know what I was actually doing, accidentally, not on purpose, of course, was like I was kind of robbing other people of their experience to experience what they needed to feel, to hear, to do, to have happen. And that also meant that for me, I was like miserable because I was like trying to fix for everyone and it wasn't always working because like they needed to have that experience. But then what it ended up for me was like, I didn't assert what I needed in any relationship. And so that became really difficult. And so I've learned that over time because that was a very powerful and painful lesson that I had to endure in this life in order to change. But now I understand, like, as much as I can be so helpful, I can be a guide. I can't do it for you. And so you might come up with some of those themes in your own life of like, oh, where do people just need to figure this out on their own? And you can be compassionate and love them, but you don't have to do anything for them or sacrifice yourself for that to happen, for their lessons. So, there's a lot of times where boundaries will come up here. And I know that boundaries can be a hard topic, or maybe there's some people who are like, I freaking love boundaries. They're great. You probably work really well with Saturn, of course, if you love boundaries. But, where are your boundaries not being respected? Where are you not respecting other people's boundaries? Keelie and I both worked in the corporate world for many, many years. And so we know what it looks like when boundaries are not respected and it's normalized. And that can be really hard, especially even at work. And, where are you looking too much to another in a relationship to address your own personal needs? If one person is your only source of happiness, it's time to reevaluate. It's time to look and say, do I make myself happy too? Or is this person responsible for everything? Because that's not fair to that person either, that you may be, putting all of that pressure on them to make you happy, or anything really, insert anything random here that you're feeling as this question comes up. And so where can you be less dependent on others to meet those needs? I even see this in friendships too. You might be dumping on other people, or other people might be dumping on you. And it's like, do you have the capacity for that? Like, is there a happy middle ground? Are you always the one who's the person, the go-to person, and nobody's ever receiving what you need from the relationship? So these are all really important things. But, like we said, that potential for overwhelm due to Venus-Neptune North Node conjunction in March and April will have you asking yourself, what is real and what is ideal? Because we need to start seeing what's actually real. And that's really hard if you think about it right now, because there's so much that blurs the boundaries of idealistic, real, not real. I mean, like, let's just look at how confusing AI can be, right? Like, thinking about that, like, it's a whole other topic, but we really need to discern, like, what is actually happening right now for me in my experience? What am I actually doing? What's really happening right now? And, am I stuck in a story loop somewhere? Am I creating some like vision of reality that's not true? Venus will also conjunct Saturn in Pisces in April. So we talked about boundaries a little bit. And so limits and negotiations and relationships are going to come up. Saturn is here to make us better. It is that strict professor, like Keelie always says, but it's also like that personal trainer. When your personal trainer says, okay, let's move up and weight, they're not doing it because they don't like you. They want you to feel the boundaries of those muscles. They want you to increase. They want you to be stronger. And so that's what Saturn's going to do at this point when it conjuncts with Venus in April. And it's asking yourself, where are you recommitting with yourself? Or in relationships. When Keelie said this earlier, I was like, yes, recommitting. And right on the precipice of spring, like the spring equinox, I feel like it's a great time of year to actually recommit to yourself, recommit to your goals, recommit to relationships, whatever you're feeling called to, like, yes, like put a ring on it. I mean, if you want to put a real ring on it, go for it. But, just know it's like a really crazy time. But, this is like a really, really great time to do that. And then also think, okay, while I'm recommitting, what boundaries do I need to have? What are my non-negotiables? What's really important to me here?
Gosh, this is going to be a very, very powerful month. A powerful month of so much growth. I mean, hearing all of these lessons, like, these are really powerful lessons that we are learning. Aries, just this energy of the self. But then like Venus, this planet of relationships. So it's like really learning about like ourself in relationships. And I think about how interesting it is, the give and the take, when we're talking about like, okay, like, yes, I'm asserting my needs. And when you think about this Aries energy, it's like, I'm in my power. I'm asserting my needs. Like, yes, this is what I need. And I'm standing up for myself and I'm fighting for what's right and what I believe in type of thing. Like that's the energy of Aries. But it's also, I really was like, as I was thinking about all this energy, I was kind of seeing it on like a scale. And it's like, where are we falling on that scale? Like, are we like at the top of the scale, like asserting ourselves, like standing in our power, almost to like our own detriment, right? Like it's too much. And like, are we not like also just like balancing that like give and take that is what is like in any, area of our life? And so it's thinking about, okay, I think in order for us to really be clear on like, how am I asserting my needs? And again, this all falls with Pisces too, because with Pisces, it's like, have we been self-sacrificing? Like, where do we need to like show up a little bit more, like set some boundaries, like speak our truth, which is what Aries is inviting us to do. But I think in order to do that, sometimes we have to be really clear on our values. You know, it's like in order for us to really know what we actually need in relationship and like what's appropriate to assert in our relationship, it's like being clear on like what do we actually really value, and are we fighting just to fight for something, or like is this actually what like we need, like our own true authentic self in relationship. So I think that there's, you know, use this Venus retrograde as an opportunity to assert your needs by getting clear on like what it is that you truly value in this world. We can always reevaluate what our values are. Like as we grow and evolve, like so do every aspect of ourselves as well. So use this as an opportunity that like every 18 months when Venus goes retrograde, like that's an opportunity for you to kind of reassess, who am I? Like what do I value in this world? And then incorporate that into your relationships. We all are in a relationship with someone in this world. So it's like incorporate that into your relationships with family members, with friends, with partnerships, whether that be a marital partnership, a business partnership, like whatever that is. Think about how those values are being reflected in your relationship. Is this relationship actually aligned with you? Is it not? Do I need to set some boundaries so that my values like and my needs are being respected? Or is it time for me to let this go? Is this person walking all over me and, you know, invading, you know, my own boundaries and not listening to me, and it's just like a one-way, you know, relationship? Well, maybe that relationship needs to be let go. So this is like a really, really, really powerful time, you guys, to just reevaluate your life as it relates to these Venus themes.
Totally. I was on the phone with someone this morning and we were talking through their career transition. And I was kind of like gently advising that, you know, over the next 50 or so days to just kind of see what comes up versus rush into anything, especially in a career transition where someone's looking to like be more aligned with their values and feel really good. It's kind of like, oh, well, the next month is going to be a lot of those themes coming up for you to evaluate from a Venus self-worth perspective, with a relationship with an employer, how you're relating to others around you. And I think that like just knowing that this time doesn't mean you can't commit or doesn't mean you can't do things. It's like, oh, wow, this is actually a great month to like get yourself a lot of answers and to set yourself on a right track versus having to redo it again later if you actually listen to these themes. So I think it's a really cool month for that. Although, you know, like we said, we can't predict anything. And so I'm also like, oh gosh, like what themes are going to come up for me? Like I'm going to be ready, but not like surprised. You know, I'll be like, oh, here it is. I understand. But, you know, as if we didn't have enough going on with eclipses, you know, Venus and Neptune and the North Node, and then, of course, Saturn coming into the mix. And we just got out of Mars retrograde in late February. We're now also going to have Venus retrograde at the same time as we have Mercury retrograde. Now, Mercury retrogrades 3 times a year, like clockwork. It's a very normal transit. It can sometimes be annoying, but it's something we're really familiar with. But when we think about stacking those themes on top of all of the other planetary movements, especially Venus going retrograde this month, you know, we have to look out a little bit more. And we talked about this in our retrogrades episode for 2025 that like, okay, specifically, if we just look at like getting your hair done, okay, this could be like a disaster if it goes wrong, because we're talking about Mercury, the planet of communication, and how we're expressing and how we're understanding things. Also with like the planet of like beauty and self-esteem and self-expression. Oh, like, could you imagine you're like, yeah, I just want to take off 2 inches of hair, and you leave with like a short French bob, you know, because maybe like the hairdresser just didn't understand your request, or you guys didn't really confirm it. It doesn't mean that will happen. It's just like, oh yeah, whatever. Like if you're very laissez-faire about it, like it could end up like bad if the communication lines are crossed, and then obviously your self-esteem is crossed. Like I'm just imagining like if Keelie or I like cut off like that much hair, we'd be like, whoa, this is a whole new world that we have to like explore. It would just be very interesting. But you know, that's just a fun example of like getting your hair done, because like that's something that we likely will experience in this period of time, you know, is like some sort of beauty thing, whether, you know, you're getting your hair done or you're getting your nails painted, or maybe you don't do any of that, or you just forget to put sunscreen on and it's like, oh my gosh, you know, it's like, who knew the UV index? But like from a personal appearance perspective, there's that one whole aspect. But with Mercury retrograde happening, there is a huge potential for misunderstanding. So a lot of time may need to be spent reflecting and contemplating the current state of what's going on. Like this isn't a time to rush into things while Mercury's retrograde. And you know, it may not feel fully clear on the next action step, but as you're recommitting to everything, to yourself, to relationships, to other things, to your goals, to your, you know, your own love, self-love, you know, you might find that it will take a little bit of time to feel certain. Or you might find more clarity at this time. It just really depends. So if you feel like things are slowing up a bit and you're like, oh gosh, I was on a roll, but now I'm like, I don't know which way I'm going. Mercury can be a prison of the mind. So, think about that, but we can always just open the door and walk out. We don't have to be stuck in that. And so with eclipses, this also intensifies the retrograde even more. And, eclipses, we'll do a whole episode. This isn't the time to be charging your crystals and doing like manifestation rituals. This is kind of the time to be like, just aware of your energy, aware of what's happening, aware of what's coming into your life, aware of what's leaving. With Mercury, it's a time to just be a little bit extra cautious to say, am I saying that in a way that aligns with my personal values and like who I want to be in this world? And, we're looking at the eclipse season for anyone with planets in Virgo and Aries, March 13th, lunar eclipse in Virgo. So it's a time of completion and endings. And then it will be followed by a chapter of new beginnings on the solar eclipse in Aries on March 29th. And that solar eclipse in Aries is the last one in a series of eclipses that we've been experiencing since late 2023. So we may experiencing all of these retrograde themes of Venus and Mercury until they leave what's called their shadow period. Now, the shadow period is kind of like, hey, Mercury stationed retrograde, right? Or Venus stationed retrograde, and it started to move, back into those signs of Aries and then into Pisces. Now, when it stations direct, it starts to move forward. It's not going to reach back to where it started, like Aries, 10 degrees of Aries for Venus, until like May 15th. All of these retrogrades, not that one specifically, but May 15th. Mark it on your calendars. Everything's going to be direct. It's going to feel a lot more different.
Yeah. So when I think about all of this like Mercury retrograde energy happening at the same time of Venus retrograde, it's really just understanding that, yes, like with Venus retrograde, as we've talked about, like stuff's coming up around those Venus themes, but like add to that some like mental confusion and just like some misunderstandings in like your conversations and like miscommunications, like Nicole was talking about. And like, how is that really, as you're moving through this Venus retrograde period, and as, Mercury is also retrograde at the same time, notice where you're having, maybe you're having challenging conversations. Maybe you're having some challenging Venus related conversations with like, in your relationships, and noticing if there's some miscommunication or misunderstanding, and just be in awareness of that, because that's what sometimes can happen with Mercury, is that yes, we're navigating this, pretty crazy like Venus retrograde time period. And also on top of that, there's some miscommunication and misunderstanding. So it's just moving through. Whenever a planet is retrograde, it's always slowing down. Like we are slowing down. So don't just like rush into conversations without having given it some time and like some opportunity for you to just like reflect on what it is you're going into the conversation with. Maybe even setting an intention of like, what you're really wanting to explore in this conversation with somebody else, or, explore in the specific area of your life. Like set yourself a little bit of an intention, and maybe the intention isn't like, we're going to resolve this in this conversation, but maybe it's more like, let me just like get to maybe whatever that like next step of understanding is, or maybe I'm understanding their perspective. Maybe there's this theme around like control. We're both showing up and we're both asserting ourselves and our own needs. Maybe I'm entering this conversation just with the intention of better understanding their needs. Okay, it's not about my needs maybe, but maybe I'm just better understanding their needs and just kind of taking a step back from everything to just really reflect on, okay, how can I validate this person and their emotions and their needs? And then how can I reapproach this conversation from that place of understanding their needs while also being able to express my needs, right? Like this is just an opportunity to take things so freaking slow, you guys. So no rushing into conversations, because you don't really want that like explosive, like miscommunication and misunderstanding happening, because that can be some Aries. There can be some explosive combative energy sometimes, and maybe defensiveness even too. So that's just one little takeaway for you guys to really kind of reflect on.
Yeah, I'm like, anyone watching this video, if you happen to be watching this, you'll watch my face. I'm like, oh yeah, like I really needed to hear that, because I go into almost every conversation with the ideal is resolution. Like a solid, firm, like point that we're moving forward from. And it's not necessarily aggressive or whatever, but I just realized that some people actually need more time to like contemplate, and I need to understand their position more. And maybe not with my clients, but at least personally, I definitely go into conversations like this. And it's really funny because I had something happen today where when Mars went direct, a computer that I used for a project, specifically from a client, just completely died. And I was going to go in today and have a pretty specific conversation, and it's not possible today because of this. And I know like we're barely into this retrograde period, but I just felt like, oh, you know what? That slowed me down. And it slowed me down in a way that I needed to be slowed down, because I don't think that my like approach to the conversation would have been helpful. And it's really helpful to think about this. So thanks for saying that. I even just got my own little like aha moment, because personally, I'm a fast mover when it comes to these things. And next month is going to be testing my patience for sure.
Totally. Yeah. We're all in this, you guys. So as you're listening to this and like things are coming up for you, feel free to share it with us, because we are right there on this journey with you guys. So just to kind of recap some of the big themes and takeaways that we've shared with you guys today, just really familiarize yourself with like, okay, what planets do I have in Aries and Pisces, and what houses are those signs occupying in my own chart? Because that's going to very specifically help you understand what kind of maybe love or connection or stories or issues may surface, and where you can really deepen into your relationship with that area of your life. So some of these like very specific Aries-Pisces storyline themes that we've talked about, reconstructing how you're showing up relationally, really getting clear on what your needs are and asserting those needs in relationship. Also learning when it's appropriate to assert your needs versus when it's your responsibility to surrender and take care of your own needs. Also showing up with compassion and some tenderness with yourself and with others. When we're talking about like our own, relationship with our own worthiness and, our self-love, like where do we need to show ourselves some compassion and some tenderness and love, and specifically look to that area of your life based on the house placement. Relearning boundaries, setting compassionate boundaries. When I was thinking about this, I wanted to share this with you guys, because I was in a conversation with one of my coaches, and he reframed boundaries in a really powerful way. He goes, people have boundaries all wrong. So many people are setting boundaries to keep things out, to keep, people or whatever out. But he was like, what a boundary really is it's like knowing what you're willing to let in. And when he reframed that for me and I really sat with that, I'm like, that is so powerful, because it almost reframes a boundary in a really positive way. Like, what am I going to let in from this person in this relationship? I'm going to let in love. I'm going to let in joy. I'm going to let in happiness. And what's not allowed in this space? Like, okay, I know what's not in here, but like, what am I letting in versus like, what am I keeping out? It is such a powerful reframe that I think will really support us as we're like moving through this Venus retrograde period and having things with boundaries coming up. We're going to be also shifting out of confusion, gaining clarity over time around love, relationships, and values. We may be revisiting some old conversations too. Like old conflicts might coming up. Old flames 100% might be coming up. So if one of your exes drops in your inbox or whatever, like do not be surprised. It's the time to like really reconnect with your passions in life, really embrace, any creative rebirths, and then just tying up loose ends, you guys, and really paving and solidifying this new path forward, however that looks for you. There is another side to all the craziness that we're going to be experiencing this March. And so just know through any chaos or confusion that you're feeling, like there is another side to this, and it's all for our own growth and our self-evolution.
Yeah. I mean, listen, what Keelie said about boundaries, like that, rewind that and go listen to that again, because that was just so good. And I love that, because if you can reframe this entire month of asking yourself, or month and change, what am I available for? What am I available for? What am I letting in? I think you're going to experience this month from a much more powerful perspective than you ever thought possible, especially with so many big planetary movements, changes, retrogrades. This is the time to really hone in on what you're available for and experiencing it with curiosity and tenderness and compassion, right? Compassionate boundaries. It's a really powerful time. So if we think about all these things happening, this is a great time to seek out support. And shameless, not so shameless plug, Keelie and I have made readings available, joint readings available between the two of us. And so you have the opportunity to sit with both of us, have our eyes on your chart, and help you understand yourself in a new perspective. And so we have a very limited amount of readings available during this retrograde period. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, do not hesitate. We'd love to get our eyes on your chart and sit with you and have a great conversation about all the essentials of your birth chart and how you are shining in this life. So thank you so much again for tuning in today for this podcast episode all about Venus retrograde and how you can prepare for the months ahead. It's going to be a really interesting astrological time, and we hope you feel more prepared. If you feel like this will help a friend, please do share with them. It always helps us grow. You can also follow along with us on social media. We're on Instagram and TikTok. We're also posting these videos live to YouTube if you prefer to see us live doing this together. We'd also love it if you could rate and review our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us grow and reach new audience. But also, like Keelie said, anything that's coming up for you in this episode, send us a DM. Let us know. We want to know what your experience is with these retrogrades as well, because we're living it with you. And as always, we'll be back next Monday with a new episode, and we hope to see you there.
Bye.
Bye.